Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about the difference between a raster layer and a smart object. Okay, Photoshop is a raster editing system for the most part, right? You can do a little bit of vector in here. And what we mean by that, again, if I zoom all the way in, right, we have our little bits of information. Okay, so this image is composed of all these pixels. Okay, what that means is usually in Photoshop I can come in and if I wanted to paint, right, like I just did a spray paint over top, I can directly edit my raster images. This is destructive editing. If I save this and come back in, I can't step back. Okay, so let me hit Command Z. Now, sometimes when you bring objects into Photoshop, they come in as a smart object, depending on how you bring them in. So, and if you don't know you're doing that, it can be really frustrating because you can't figure out why you can't adjust it. So, on the layer, I'm going to right-click on my layer, and I'm going to convert to a smart object. When you do that, you get a little, you notice down the bottom here, right? You get a little emblem, and that tells you this is now a smart object. Now, what that means is I can apply some effects and some filters, but I cannot directly edit this. Okay, so you notice I get like the Ghostbuster symbol, right? If I try and paint on it, it's going to tell me it has to be rasterized. Do you want to rasterize this? And cancel. If you bring your image in as a smart object, that's how you tell the difference. You have this little emblem down in the bottom right corner. You can always right-click on the layer and rasterize the layer. Okay. Now, the nice thing about smart objects is this. We're not going to get too much into filters right now, but there are some we're going to play with. That includes blur. So with a smart object, now if I go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, okay, and if I pull it further to the right, it makes it more blurry. Okay, I'm going to hit OK. You'll notice what it does is it adds the filter down here. Okay, it has not directly edited my information. Essentially, what Photoshop is doing is treating this like it's a linked file that is not directly editable. Okay, so the nice thing about this is I can save my file and come back in, and this filter is still here. So if I double click on this, right down at the bottom, okay, so I got to double click on the Gaussian blur. I can also come back in and change my blur again. Okay, pull it out to here where you can't even tell what it is. Okay, yes, it is the apple that is no more. Okay, and at some point, if I want, okay, I can click and drag that filter right to my trash, and now it's gone. Okay. Now the other thing I want to talk about just briefly is layer styles. Okay. Layer styles work also like a smart object. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize my layer. In order to access layer styles, I don't want to click on my thumbnail or on the name. I just want to double click on the layer itself, and it's going to pull up my layer styles palette. We don't use these a whole ton right away because they get abused and people do terrible things with them, like they put bevel and emboss on everything. Okay, those of you who do graphic design, don't bevel and emboss your type. Just don't. Okay, that's a terrible thing to do. Now, let me show you though what this can do, and the difference, by the way, between opacity and fill. Let me show you here real quick. So I'm just going to add a stroke. Okay. Now you'll notice I can turn things on and off. If I want to actually, oh, that's awful. If I want to actually alter what's there, I have to click on the element. Okay, so I'm going to click here on stroke. I can add more than one. That's, and any time you see these little plus signs, that means you can add multiple instances of it. Okay, so on this stroke, and this checkbox, turn it on and off. I'm going to go ahead and make the size larger. I'm going to change the color to red. Okay, I'm going to bump my opacity all the way up. Okay, your position is probably on the inside. I'm going to change it to outside, and I'm going to hit OK. Now I have my apple outlined in red. Now here's the difference between opacity and fill. On opacity, if I pull this to the left, it makes everything fade out. Okay. On fill, it only affects what's on the layer. It does not affect the effects or stroke. Okay. So I can make my apple disappear, and I still maintain, okay, those layer elements. Okay, the layer styles. Now this is useful. Let me go ahead and make a new document. Just 8.5 by 11. Okay. Make a new layer. It's easier to tell sometimes what you're doing if you go ahead and add some information. Let's say I'm going to make like some lightning, right? So I'm going to get a small brush, and I'm going to draw like it's lightning coming down. Okay, that looks terrible, but I don't care. I'm just using this to demonstrate. I'm going to double click to access my layer styles. Okay, add an inner glow. Okay, I can change the color. I'm going to keep it a light blue. I'm going to go ahead and add an outer glow. Okay, you can play with your opacity, noise. You'll notice what happens if I pull it to the right. It makes it look like it's speckling. Here, let me zoom in. Okay, so it gives you sort of an airbrush effect for those people who've used airbrushes. I can do the spread. It's how far it goes, the size. Okay. So this is going to look terrible. I would normally play with this a little bit more. You can also change, you'll notice, your blend modes. Right, so if I do screen, you can't see it. I could do overlay. The problem is that it's on white, so I'll show you here in a minute. I'm just going to leave it for normal for now, just so you can see. Okay. You can also play with like your jitter, and essentially these curves are how it. We're not into curves yet, but this follows curves. It'd be Command U is the normal one for curves, so it'll change the blending. That's all. So go ahead and play with that a little bit. I'm going to hit OK. Now I can take my fill down, okay, and now I just have this effect. Okay, so I could, for example, take my smudge tool and I can grab this, and when I pull out, okay, or if I take my brush and I shrink it way down, okay, I can make it look like a live wire or something like this. It's probably a little more effective if I have a dark background. Let me do that real quick. No, not so much. Okay, I would want like a much brighter blue if I was going to do that. Okay, so that's what layer style effects are really good for. So if you want to make it look like you're shooting out lightning because you're the Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars, you could totally do that. Okay, and I think I'll end there. What I want you to do on this file is just play with this a little bit. So you don't have to do exactly what I did, but I want to see you have the fill at 0, play with your layer styles, mess around with it, and see what effects you can get. You can get some really interesting things going on.